we go. We're back. We're live.
We're live now.
Welcome to Residing in North Idaho. I have to add a couple things that I always forget, guys. We are also on Spotify and Apple iTunes and other podcast platforms. So if you don't want to look at Eric's face, you can go there and you can just hear his beautiful voice. So that's out there. I just want to let everybody know about that. Thank you for joining. We have, I'm pretty stoked about today's episode. We are going to talk about the fentanyl. Is it a crisis? Are we there yet or not?
Oh, I think
Epidemic. Yeah, we're there. Okay.
Absolutely.
And we're going to talk about it as it pertains to North Idaho, particularly, and what that looks like up here, because I know we get a lot of questions about that from people out of state and from people in the area. So we have two experts in that field today, and we're going to dive into it. And I'm pretty excited about this conversation. We have the lovely Eric Boardman.
Look at my face. You just want to
you're the best looking guy in the room.
He's tan too, because he got back from his incredibly long vacation in Hawaii.
It was so good.
I bet. Someday I'll take a vacation. I did like a 6-hour vacation last week, so that was pretty cool. Yeah,
good.
Nice.
Yeah, one overnighter at Quinn's Hot Springs, and I almost didn't work. Almost.
You needed to decompress after last week.
Yeah, for sure. And then special guest, we have our friend Seth. He's a patrol captain over at Shoshone County SO, which is just to the east of us here in Coeur d'Alene. And pretty excited. We got two Seths in the room. That's a big deal in itself.
It's a good
Not a very common name. So yeah, let's jump in. Did you have info on us both coming from the same place?
Oh, and you guys both being in New York originally?
Is that the real deal?
Yeah.
Where's from,
funny.
dude?
From Albany. So it's actually
Get out of here.
So when I came here, so Orange Street, right?
Albany.
Like the ghetto of Albany.
Dude.
And this brother talks like he's from there too, though. He talks like he's from like, I don't know.
Just what I'm
Dude, it's Albany. I used to go. I had some buddies that went to SUNY Albany, so I'd go up there and party sometimes.
Okay, yeah, you were right up the street. Those block parties were different.
So I grew up in Hyde Park, right down the river.
Okay,
right by Poughkeepsie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's freaking wild, man. Dude, small world. Two Souths from New York.
Here.
A little bit. Yeah.
There's something about the New York background. It won't surprise you that in college he was a bouncer. That was his job on the side.
No student loan debt here. I paid my way through college as a bouncer, and it was a good time too. It was a good time.
Look, now I'm not much of I'm a competitive person, but I'm not like a rank guy. So when he says two like subject matter experts in drugs, I'm gonna admit this. This happened right before this podcast. Talking to a newer officer that's out there trying to buy a house, right? I said, hey, I'm gonna go do this podcast on fentanyl. First, he said, oh, weird. You're gonna go talk to a captive audience about drugs. Because I always manage to talk about drugs just about every podcast. He said, senior cops told me that there's only one guy in the state that's probably better with drugs than you. And he goes, I don't know who it is. It's some dude from ISP. And actually they said they don't think he works for ISP anymore. I was like, weird. I'll bet I know who that is. And it's funny. It's
so I got the two top dogs in the room. I mean, you don't have to toot your own horn. I'll toot it for you, but
he and I both testify as expert witnesses, and we've actually done that on separate cases together. So
cool.
He stays on the forefront of it. And in preparation for one of those cases, I will say, I looked over some of his notes. It was like, damn, I got to up my game.
Quick backstory. Like, I guess how long have you both been in law enforcement and length of time? Years?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I've been 10 years in Idaho. I was 5 years with Kootenai County and just hit 5 years with the PD. Worked interdiction on the interstate, but for us, it was part-time. For these guys, and he'll talk about his, but they did it full-time where it's, you're really looking at criminal indicators and you're looking at trafficking, not just for drugs, but stolen property, guns, human trafficking, stuff like that. I-90's designated high-intensity drug trafficking area, so I did that. And then, worked street crimes unit, essentially is what it is in Coeur d'Alene, Marshall's task force and all that stuff. Really been drug-focused my whole career.
Sweet.
Which he's downplaying a little bit, because when I was on the road still, like we'd go out and around and you'd automatically get this list of dudes who were up to the task of doing what we do. And it's a very short list, frankly. And you always know the couple of guys from each agency that do it. And he was on pretty much everyone's list as well. And what he was able to do with the CAT team and stuff was amazing. And like you can watch pockets. And we got intel, particularly from the ISP side, when doing it all the time and watching groups move and tracking organizations, where they actually stopped going into Coeur d'Alene. So you always have a drug problem. That's always going to be a thing. However, if you do your job well enough, you're going to watch those organizations avoid certain areas. And you even pick that up on cell phone traffic and everything.
As a citizen of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, I thank you both for doing that and push that problem somewhere else, as long as it's not in Our backyard does.
That's the idea.
Well,
That's the idea.
You always joke with cops, right? They're like, there are some cops out there that recognize like there's a Sarah model of policing. I hate to get into book stuff, but there really is. And part of that is, you try to push it out. You try to push it out of your community. I always challenge try to arrest them first. Try to hold them accountable first, because accountability is important.
Yep.
And with us two and other cops, I promise by the time I push you out, I've already tried to arrest you out. Because I don't want them targeting good, innocent citizens within our community.
Yeah. Yeah. So Seth, what's your background? Like ISP, you came from there first?
Yeah. So originally I did.
So you're from New York. Your name is Seth, and you were a trooper too. I mean, God,
that's
damn,
right.
I think I just found my new best friend.
And actually, I never expected to fall into policing. Frankly, I did almost full military career in the military for about 17 years. Came over here as a logical fall into it, and then I loved it, every minute of it. So I took a lot of those skills I had from New York, growing up there as you grew up there. It's a different world. So it teaches you things that you don't learn in Idaho a lot of times. So I saw those open air drug markets and how they moved drugs and stuff in the community, because it's very like out in the open there, because they don't care anymore because it's not policed. And so then I fell my way into ISP. I actually tried to get on with Spokane as well. I didn't have an English credit. I had plenty in college, but I didn't have an English credit. So I got a brother over there in major crimes. And it worked out, though, because I think this is where I was supposed to be at the time. Yeah. And within 6 months off FTO, we didn't really have a drug program here. And the old captain was a great captain, Captain Kempf, pulled me and an old canine handler aside and was like, hey, we'd like you to do this full time. So we dove right into it, learned as much as we could, as fast as we could. And we just dove as far into organizational movement of contraband. Fentanyl particularly started to pop up in the early days even, but really didn't become popular for 4 or 5 years. And then for a time, we actually went down. It's funny you bring up the Arizona guy. We actually went down on the governor's task force to do the Arizona border stuff and spend some time in Southie Tucson. I wish everyone could go to Southie Tucson to see what you want to prevent from happening here.
How long ago was that?
Shoot, was
that during the current presidential administration?
It was during the Trump era, okay. I think. So I think it was roughly 4 years ago. Yeah. So it would have been towards the end, I think. Well, that's a good question. So it's online as far as when we went down there. It's publicized pretty heavily. But went down and did that. Started instructing like interview interrogation, which I did a lot of in the military as well. So it was a smooth transition, which I focused predominantly on motivational interview, which is interesting compared to the tactics. I just find it more effective, which kind of on that note, like everyone usually takes two sides of drugs. People either go send them to prison for the rest of their life, or they go, well, it shouldn't be a crime. It shouldn't be a crime. It's victimless. That's this and this and this, which I watched him do. And I think I do the same thing. Where like he was saying, he'd send a lot of drug dealers to prison, but they liked him when they went. We treat them well. Because it's not our job to judge them per se. It's our job to catch them. And we both believed in that, but we treat them very well. So and that allowed us to get even more information of what was happening and how drugs were being moved on the street, and intel that a lot of other guys didn't have.
So it's smart and I've noticed that too when I was half-ass cop, was like, you just be cool with people, talk to people. You will get more down the line than that quick arrest stat. It's like, that's cool. You book them, especially in California now. You book them on even anything, and they're freaking out in 5 minutes. So it's like, whatever. But if you take that time, you build that rapport, build a relationship, good to go.
Well, I think he touched on that too. I fell backwards into law enforcement, right? Like it was a transition. My mom was a cop growing up. Everybody that knew me, and even in the military, was shocked that I got into law enforcement. I wanted to facilitate my move up here. I think all three of us sitting here, we can look back at times in our life where we could have gone down a couple of different paths.
When I was partying in Albany, right? That's when, for sure.
Albany's dangerous.
You could have gone down a couple different paths. I'm not saying we would have ended up like organized crime members, but where I definitely could have diverged a little bit. Yeah. So by the time I get somebody in the back of my car, that part of it's over, even if there was a little back and forth or even a bit of a skirmish. And I always say this, when I learn about drugs or I'm teaching about drugs, I learn way more from the people in the back of my car that have lived it than I do a 30-year cop reading off PowerPoint slides. I am curious. I always want to ask those questions, man. Like, hey, what did you first start using? When did you first start using? How do I find you when you were 16 years old? Like, what signs and indications? What path did you take? I'm ultimately curious if I can intervene and save a kid. I go teach this to high schoolers, man. And the game is so much different now. If I can save one of those, it's worth it. And that info comes from people in the back of my car.
Yeah.
Right. Not from a class.
Yeah. When did, so I'm trying to think, like when I kind of stopped working the road was like, I don't know, 2018, somewhere in there, 19 maybe. And then I went on to some other things and then retired. But like I never dealt with fentanyl. I was in Northern California. I don't think I ever hooked anybody for it. It was always meth and heroin and, you know, maybe green dope at the time or before that. Never. I don't think I ever once. So like, is it kind of recently been taken off?
As an illicit.
Or was I just a shitty cop?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I know you're itching because you're like, oh, because both of us, because I know we talk very similar, but when you talk about the opiate industry and the abuse of like oxys and hydrocodone and how that industry worked and how you used to have pill mills or docs writing illegitimate scripts or people getting those. And then all of a sudden the supply gets cut off, right? Because the FDA really starts to regulate it. They hammer doctors and all that, but it creates this significant demand because it doesn't get rid of the opiates or the opiate addicts. All it did is create a whole new group of opiate addicts. Fentanyl's been around since 70s.
It's been around since the 70s, but as far as really hit the market, I think I started seeing it briefly. And because I was working a highway a lot, I would start seeing it before a lot of the inner towns, per se, in North Idaho. I think I started seeing it around 2000, once in a while, late 2018.
Same
and
here.
then it started to really hit end of 2019, but you could see it taper off. So like I could even put it down a ratio of, it was like, when I first started, it was all meth. And then you see like it was 80% meth, 20% heroin.
Yep.
And then you'd watch, it almost became even on the heroin and meth. And then you'd watch these opiates start popping. And now I would say the fentanyl has overtaken the meth, the amount of hits we get.
Wild.
Yeah.
Our new cops, this is what, and you and I talked about this before this last case, our new officers that are really after it and they're out there to interdict criminal activity. And I do want to put this out. I absolutely do not believe drugs are a victimless crime for the person using them, their families, everything else. But they are at the crux of so much of our property crime and our person's crime. It's a significant factor.
Yeah.
But where I was going is our new guys now are encountering fentanyl. They can better detect the smell of fentanyl than they can marijuana.
What?
So for us guys, we're like, because the first thing my nose naturally goes to, that's the way my brain's been trained, is like, I got plain smell weed, right? That gets me into the car. Sorry for those of you that are in states where you don't have a plain smell doctrine. Sorry about that.
Sucks.
It sucks. But that's the way my brain's trained. These guys, they'll walk up and say, Sarge, I got plain smell of fentanyl.
And then you go back to like older cops, right? Older cops had never seen that. A lot of them are now my chairs, right? In the admin roles, and they have, you would say that. I said that in a couple of reports early on, and it was like the minds in the room blew amongst officers.
You just blew my mind.
Yeah, where they were like, there's no way.
Now, are you smelling the actual drug or are you smelling all the shit that goes with it?
So you're smelling the actual, it's all of it combined. That is a great question because meth, there's case law from back, I think it's 1948, 1958, that kind of dictates how we do this. And it's all the binding agents combined with the fentanyl. When it's smoked, there's a bunch of different factors. There's the heat. You're using a blowtorch usually.
Yeah, handheld butane torch.
Yeah, and then some foil along with the straw. So there's a bunch of different factors to that smell, but it is so unique and overpowering. I agree with those new officers.
Yep.
In fact, when I heard him articulate, I had like a proud moment, and like I knew his was way more because he's like their dad in this sense and taught him up on it. But it's wild and it's so unique. In fact, there's clips now floating around like Krispy Kreme workers saying like, yeah, man, I smelled it in another room and clearly this chick was smoking dope. And, so we cleared look it up. It's on YouTube.
You're blowing my mind
it's
right
crazy.
now. I had no idea.
So in preparation, we're going into this. We aren't talking about an existing case, right? This is all theoretical, of course. But I was talking to a young lady during it was actually a warrant service. So she's in custody in the back of the car. This is where I learned all my stuff, right? I'm not going to waste that opportunity. She and I are stuck in there together. I said, hey, do you think, is it unique to you? Can you smell it? She goes, oh yeah. If somebody's used it in the car in the last 5 days, I can smell it. Then you start to break down, why is that? Well, because for her brain, your brain can't tell the difference between good dopamine and mimic dopamine, which is what fentanyl is. It's assigned to pleasure. So her nose has been trained, right, to detect that because it's assigned to pleasure. Just like right now, there's 50 smells in this room, probably 3 different types of Axe body spray, right? And some whiskey. But your brain doesn't register that. But if something was burning, we'd all be like, whoa, that's weird, right? Or something that catches. It's like why a smell can take you back to a memory because it's emotionally relevant.
Yeah.
So for her, not only did she say like, yeah, I can smell it in a car. I said, well, she goes, but the kind, I said, what do you think it smells like? She said, the kind that I like smells like burnt popcorn. So I was like, the kind you like? She goes, yeah, the other kind, it smells kind of like burnt rubber. I said, so not only can you tell if it's burnt fentanyl, you can tell if it's good. She's like, yeah, that type I can, because, so when you start to break down what that is, it's a totally different animal.
Wow.
It's just like cocaine users back in the day could taste it. And they're like, all right, that's pure enough. That's solid. That's right off the block.
That's wild.
Where
it's a sign to pleasure. Dude.
Yeah. People don't understand the more expertise you get in these types of crafts. Like, it's just like whiskey. Like, I have a whiskey collection. Like, I'll get the nose first, then the taste, then the finish, and I can tell the quality and usually even the proofage. It's the same idea, and you just refine it down. And a user, there's very few things in their life they focus on as much if they're using fentanyl as fentanyl.
Because that's a sign to pleasure.
Yeah, it's a sign to pleasure.
Yeah, it's wild.
And it's how much they're using it a day.
Is fentanyl, is it more destructive to people than, say, like heroin? Or what would be the previous equivalent? Would it be heroin, basically?
Heroin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the heroin's interesting. So like he mentioned with the opioid epidemic, right, to where essentially there was a lot of pharmaceuticals, a lot of people in that realm that was doing it. And then we cut off the supply, right? This seems to be completely different. And again, this is going more in expertise realm where the cartels cut off the supply. Most fentanyl users I talk to would rather have heroin because of what. Sorry.
It's fine.
You're good.
You get the bat phone with them. Good? Okay.
Yep, I'm good.
Keep rolling.
So, but in this case, the cartels cut off the supply of heroin. So you don't see, they just stopped pushing it north and instead they swapped it with fentanyl, which is so much worse, by light years worse.
Is it why? Is it cheaper for them to get?
Absolutely.
Do we know?
To cultivate.
So it's cheaper to cultivate. It's more addictive. Obviously, a lot more clientele if there's dye. That's been proven. But also, you see it also being done in powder form, which honestly I don't know if is going to stay. Which I would be curious on your thought on that because of the fact of pill form is so much safer to transport and all those things. Like, I mean, when you're pushing in bags of powder fentanyl, I expect it to be used with binders just like pills are. If they're going to go that route, which we've seen a little bit, turns into like almost rock cocaine looking.
That purple stuff that we're getting.
Purple stuff. Yeah. And it actually is so much more potent, but to keep it in just pure powder, I lean towards, I don't think that trend's going to stay.
As a delivery mechanism, I wouldn't disagree. I think the thing that's, however, the powder form is easier for them to break down and shoot. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if the pills, you have to break down those binding agents. But that is the dangerous part of fentanyl. I wanted to go back to that real quick for those that aren't aware. So there's some retired cops that are listening to this, and we're in the same boat as you. Like, hey, where'd this come from? When I say it came from the 70s, fentanyl's been around since the 70s. It was made in China. It was for like all altruistic purposes. It was like end of term life care stuff in hospice care centers. It's pain management. When the opiate epidemic, when they cut off pills, I remember going to a call where a guy was chewing on a used fentanyl patch outside of a hospice care center because he was such a desperate. You want to talk about the personification of rock bottom? Mm-hmm. You're chewing on a fentanyl patch that was on somebody's arm in a hospice care center. But so it's been around for a long time. When they started cutting off that supply line and we started getting in front of the oxys and hydros and Percocets and all that stuff, they realized they can make a whole lot of money. So we started importing it. It went right along with the dark web. Onion network where you could basically go on to Dope or Amazon and order whatever you want. So we started getting an influx of that into United States. Dudes would buy that powder on the dark web, buy a pill press for $3,500, make their own pills. And I don't know about you, but I started seeing them first. They were all janky and like cut off and they were different shapes, but they looked like Bonner County Bill was out there making them in the middle of the woods. No offense to anybody from Bonner County, all right? They just like to do stuff off grid and make it themselves.
And you weren't good at making pills.
Yes, no, it's terrible. But yeah, so that's how we started seeing them. They were all janky. Transnational criminal organizations got a hold of how much money was being made, and they're like, okay, they already have labs set up to make crystal meth. So they just kind of converted them. They have like quality control down there, like white lab coat quality control labs. They imported it, and then we started seeing these blues, and they've just never gone away.
Speaking of like how much money could be made in the early days, and it still is quite extreme. So I always say one of the metrics you go off of how successful you are is keeping drugs out of your community is actually the price point of the drugs.
100% right.
So early on, for example, you go over to anywhere west of here, in Washington, Seattle, particularly Federal Way area down in California and Oregon. There's very little consequences to having drugs, and particularly fentanyl pills are down under $2 a pill. I mean, they're almost free.
That's cheap.
And it's terrible, right? Because they're more accessible to the younger and younger ages at that level. So over here, you saw it jump up to around $30 a pill in the early days, and in Montana it was up to 50.
Yep.
Damn.
Sorry, I had so many traffickers.
Oh,
so you'd see an immense amount of traffickers. So for a section of time, particularly COVID money, it's amazing how many people became drug dealers during COVID. All of a sudden, they got these these stipends, and it was incredible. We were popping 2 a week back then. It was pretty bad.
Piss people off, and you tell them it was their tax dollars.
And it was a lot of tax dollars. Right. I can't tell you how many stories that were off of tax dollars. In fact, I got a weed trafficker once. It was 8 or 10 children, and they actually told me they took all the stipend money and bought 40 pounds of weed to traffic back out to, I think it was Wisconsin. It was pretty comical. God, damn. But it's rough. It's rough. Choice. Taxpayers don't like hearing those stories, but they're pretty common.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they would make so much money. If you do the math on 1,000 pills, you could buy for under $2,000, and you could flip for a metric ton of money. To where thankfully the feds and us have stepped in so extremely to where, I don't know if you talked about it before, but in July 1, there's going to be a trafficking statute in Idaho for fentanyl. Up to this point, we've been using the feds heavily because you can bring them in and then it can really throw the hammer at these people to stop these things from happening, right? And I'd say it's been successful in a lot of ways because people, especially drug dealers, are terrified to come here. I can't tell you how many times, I'm sure he's the same, where we're intercepting phone text messages and stuff. I've seen your name on different.
Same.
It's fascinating, and I've seen my own name on writings. Be like, well, Seth Green stopped me for this. Yeah. Don't do this and this and this in drug traffickers' cars.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool. So, but they will say that don't come to Idaho. And one guy near the end of my time on the road, it literally laid out a list of pros and cons to coming to Idaho. It was that extreme. Like he literally sat in his room, wrote the pros and cons. It was massively cons.
That's awesome.
I appreciate him laying out a pros and cons list. Like he should turn that attention to some other trade, and maybe he'd do quite well.
You know you're doing something right when they start lining out routes of travel to completely avoid your jurisdiction. Yeah. They're like, okay, we're just going to avoid that entire stretch, which for our community members, a lot of people will sit out there and say, well, it's traffickers. How are they really impacting our local area if they're just traveling through? We've had several calls, violent calls, bad calls for service along the way, where they're pulling into a gas station. There's either a hit or they're so high or they wreck into somebody and kill one of our community members.
Right.
The further we can drive that away, the better.
Yeah, and criminal organizations, they live off of the income of pills and other contraband, stolen property, and so on and so forth. And like you said, it all comes back to drugs. A lot of it does. And if you can keep that out. For example, we track, I'm not going to say too much detail, but like when the sheriff asked me to come on as the patrol captain of Shoshone, I was like, these are the cartels, the cartel that's bringing dope in here. I was like, we try to track their movement in coordination with all these different agencies and keep as much intel as we can. And they haven't really developed the same level of footholds in northern Idaho specifically as in all these other regions. Like we helped backlines with the state days, like they're pretty rampant in other areas of the world. Dude. So, other areas of the U.S. They're not, they can't, it's very difficult for them to control northern Idaho.
It's such a tempting little drive too, because you can just like, oh man, a couple hours,
just the panhandle.
A couple hours, we can be right across it. It's way better than going all the way around. And they get snatched up.
Yeah, dude. Well, it's hard to get a foothold here. By and large, almost most agencies in Idaho, I can speak for mine, we're really pretty aggressive about interdicting criminal activity, and truly, drugs are a really good tool because we know that that's at the center of a lot of our crime. It's hard for me to catch somebody burgling a car. That's luck. Yep. I got to be right place, or I'm not going to rely on luck. I might not be able to catch you with that stolen property or catch you burgling the car, but I'll get you with the dope in your pocket. That's a skill set I can cultivate and work on. That's what I try to impress upon officers. Or even, man, I've had cops come here from other states, and one of them flat out said, he goes, yeah, I'm not driving around chasing meth pipes. Like, okay.
You should be.
Yes, absolutely. Because, hey, man, what you're doing is you're stopping a whole bunch of that other crime, meth and fentanyl especially.
Yeah.
That pushes people to go commit crimes against truly innocent citizens.
And people say it's victimless. It's not victimless. Like you said before, like it goes to property crimes, it goes to violent crimes, and then one that's almost never talked about ever is the amount of sexual crimes that come from it. So like sex crimes is such a big thing in the US right now, and it's trending and hashtag this and hashtag that, which that's great. But then if you ever talk about the association between drugs and sex crimes, all the ones, it's still victimless. I'm like, it's not. If you talk to, and I'd be curious on your take on this because I haven't had you in this setting before, the amount of people that have given me information and stuff, my number one target was women. And it was because if you relay that to them, be like, hey, who's the guy, the drug dealer that's stealing you fentanyl, who's also raping you, right? And those types of harder things, like I would put it in above 90%. If they're in that field of society for longer than 2 years, it's above 90%. Dude. And then the men, I would say we don't even know. There's a lot of them, but it's even more taboo in that community where they will not tell you.
100% agree with you with women. I've got, when you talk about, you discuss with them in the back of the car and you relate to them and you talk to them about what's gone on in their life and what pushed them down that path. I have several that I stay in contact with weekly that are clean now 3-4 years, which with fentanyl is rare. But man, what a great resource, not just to further my job, but I get a lot out of my kid still has my last name and it's because you arrested me. That's pretty cool. Like that to me is pretty powerful, especially on the back end where there's so many that do not. But they'll say all the time, I've had them help me teach drugs class to lateral cops and new cops. Said the things that I've done for drugs or the things that I've been forced to do in order just to get right so I don't feel sick, I can't ever undo any of that. All I can do is try to
me. That's terrible, right? You think about like, I've got a daughter. It's like you think about like a person falling into that world, and I know it can happen to good people too, and like just getting into that trap and then going down that road is super disturbing. I used to find on cell phones like pics of, like with meth pipes, like the places I have seen a meth pipe in pictures is like, like some weird stuff's going on there. It's nasty.
Well, and when you start to break down like how this, curious to get your opinion, fentanyl in general has created an entirely different level of addict with what we were seeing before. When you were talking about the differences in prices when we first saw it, what about the differences in usage quantity? Man, if you were a hard user when this was first around, you were 3 to 5 pills a day. Now, 40 to 50 pills a day.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So the things they have to do to afford that, first of all.
Yes. And they've gotten cheaper, right? But when you think about how it alters your brain chemistry and goes into that pleasure receptor, mimics dopamine, and just, I think about it like a firework. They call it chasing the dragon.
You'll never get as high as you did the first time, right?
But they're constantly chasing
unless you do it more and more and more.
Exactly. Or the next one. Yeah.
That's why the dealer that's dealing the stuff that kills people is the most popular dealer in town. Because the closer you can get to dying, the closer you get to the dragon.
That's so
it's wild when you start.
So freaking sad.
And that, dude, it's totally, from my experience, I've only been a cop 10 years, but the addiction level and the fact that we're getting overdoses commonly just with smoking. Mm-hmm. When you and I first started, bro, you had to slam. You had to slam to OD on overdose.
That was one of my next questions is like, what's the preferred method of ingestion at this point? Or is it vary?
Right now, we're definitely still in the using a tutor through the foil stage is the most common. You'll always see all the different ways of ingestion, but that's the most common.
Can you explain that for people that don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much they'll get a chunk of foil, and for a lot of cops actually still have a hard time explaining this in their reports. And like now being the admin role, I see a lot more reports. I'm like, we'll work on that. Yeah. But it's just a little square of foil they'll cut up, and then they'll essentially, a lot of times even have it pre-prepped. And then they'll get to their location. A lot of times they can't even wait. So they'll just pull off on the side of the highway. I can't tell you how many people now, and you didn't used to get that with meth or even heroin as often. They'll just pull off on the side of the highway, and then I'll see them at 7 a.m. come up on the door, and they're both zombieing it out as you're looking at all the fentanyl they just did. But they'll take a butane torch lighter, and they'll put it under. It needs a little extra heat. They'll rarely use the Bic lighters. There's just not enough heat. And then essentially what happens is this blue pill, for the case of the example, will slide down the foil, leaving a black line. And that line is what he was already referencing as chasing the dragon. And then they'll inhale the smoke coming off of it with a straw. And that'll hit them with the high. And I've if you look up any videos or anything, you'll just see people lights out. And then you actually at times can't even tell if they're dead or sometimes they're actually dead. Spokane's seeing this a lot to where people won't realize they're dead, even their fellow users. So they'll be sitting there dead.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are even smoking this stuff with him don't realize it for hours and hours and hours.
Crazy.
And then finally they hit their buddy and he just falls over and they're like, oh no.
When
Too late for the Narcan at that point, huh?
And when we get this, if we get it into a video and we're talking about that, I'll give you pictures that show exactly, because I'm a visual person. When I teach it, I'll bring examples because I want to show people, right? Because this is important for citizens. And I know a lot of our followers are cops or military, but just as a citizen of the community, when I go teach this, I'm not doing it as a cop to other cops or a cop to firefighters. Just as citizens of the community, this is a real thing. If you're still operating under, kids will be kids. They're going to use. I experimented with drugs. Man, this is a different animal. I hate to be the like harbinger of doom, but what's available to them is not like what's.
I am very thankful that I did not grow up in this time, right? Because refer back to my time in Albany, I was doing dumb shit, and it's like, you know, as a kid, I would expect a certain level of that, right? But there's like no going back from.
There is.
I have this conversation with my kids a lot, and it's very frank, and it's like, hey, like you can't. You just don't know where anything's coming from.
Think about all the hangups, man, that we didn't have to deal with. Yeah. Not just drugs. Like one mistake. I've gone to ODs, man, and I swear it's like the kid's first mistake. Or social media. Can you imagine the dumb shit you would have put on social media when you were 16?
Just a cell phone.
It would have followed me forever.
I probably would have sent a bad picture to somebody and regretted it deeply, right? Like I didn't have to even worry about that because I had a pager.
You sent me a bad picture today.
Yeah.
You know the consequences.
So I got some buddies that work for Spokane PD, and like they deal with this. Oh my God, the place is a mess, dude. And one of them was mentioning that like there's a difference between these people that are super high on fentanyl. Like there's just their eyes are dead, more dead than other drugs. It's like, are you guys seeing that too? Is that?
Oh yeah, they're barely there. They're barely there at all. They're wandering through existence. In fact, I relate it to a lot of people. And I've never tried it, obviously. But the experiences they say about what it's like to be on fentanyl for a week, 2 weeks, those types of things is actually the same experiences I had deployed overseas when I didn't sleep for 72 hours.
Yeah.
So a 72-hour week, when you're done with it and you sleep and then you wake back up again, so it's around 5 days total, it felt like a month had gone by.
Mm.
But in their case, they don't really remember it.
Mm-hmm.
So like they've had these euphorias and stuff like you said, but they don't, it's like life is passing and then you just come out of these trips not knowing where you are. And obviously the brain is taking such a massive effect. Their IQ is definitely lowering and it's taking some hits, but it's a fascinating thing of what happens to the body.
Yeah. And the brain. So when you talk to these addicts afterwards and they're trying to get right and then they're going to treatment and they're able to get through that 21 days of withdrawal that's awful physically. The only drug that's worse withdrawal wise is alcohol, but they get through all of that and then they have to retrain themselves. Talking to one in particular, it's sad. They have to retrain themselves socially what's supposed to make them happy because your pleasure receptors don't work the same way. Right. So those positive endorphins you get from, say, like I'm a sports guy, so you score a touchdown or your kid has success or you watch them get married, it's not going to hit the same because those pleasure receptors get burned out and destroyed because your brain doesn't know the difference. Mm-hmm. And that dopamine, that first high you get is supposed to be unreal, but it destroys those parts. And we still don't know the long-term effects because it's only been around for 6 years real hard, right? So what the long-term physiological effects of it are.
And I like your approach to it. Back before that statement, before how you were saying how you're teaching people about drugs. Like, I don't know what do you guys think? Did the DARE program work?
Good old DARE program.
No, dude, I'm bringing this up, but
I hate the DARE program. No. It was this: if you smoke weed, all of a sudden, somehow, you look like the biggest ever in 10 days.
But
like,
who
it was wild.
But who did they have teach it? Like that's
right. They had people who teach who had no idea about drugs.
Exactly.
But your approach also like is combining. This is scary, right? Like you said with the real estate thing before we started this is like be honest, be upfront, which is what. That's a separate topic, but leadership and police need too, is say, this is going to happen, but do it with that level of compassion. And even for the drug users and stuff with the compassionate sense to explain how people got there and then have people tell their stories is crucial. You said chasing the dragon. I got a guy who had a stolen handgun, a bunch of dope, and then he had an entire dissertation that was huge. And I still have it if you ever want to read it.
Yeah.
But it called Chasing the Dragon. That's what he named it. And it was a story of his life. And how he disappointed his parents and his grandparents. And it was actually quite like heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
So to teach this stuff of what is out there, but also compile it with compassion, because kids go through this rebellious stage where if you just say, don't do that, they don't care. That was what the DARE program was. Right. It was like they just went, okay, I don't care. I remember watching the DARE program and being like, this is dumb.
As a
and
kid.
I was 12.
Yeah.
And that's when you're hitting the critical thinking, which again, you touched on, was like, how much time are we really spending on critical thought? Because normally it's one of two ways, which now usually it's letting your kids do whatever they want. Typically, be what you want to be, however you are, fine. And then the other side, which I do think is less common now, but I grew up in it, was insanely strict. So it wasn't allowing the child to go through that critical thought process. I'm a nerd on psychology, so it's a little bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
But and then developing through that, which through that compassionate teaching, that's how you get them there.
And I'll tell you this, when I open it up, I've taught this at Genesis Prep had me there. You'd be amazed at how many schools are afraid of me teaching it. Honestly, because they think I'll make them curious.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, man. But Genesis Prep opened their doors and they said, hey, I kind of went and gave them a little spiel. I said, number one, I'm really bad with training guidelines or syllabus. That's not my style. I've got like 8 slides with some pictures and then I just go. And I want there to be value. So if they have questions, stop me and ask questions. Say, look, I'm not up here as an authority figure for you guys in this class, right? In this instance, I'm not your principal. I'm not your RSO. I'm going to empower you with knowledge, because all these things that I've learned from people in the back of the car or on the streets or what I've seen, I can't just keep this up here. I have to give it to you. We have to treat you like young adults and empower you with this knowledge, because your parents aren't going to have this knowledge. As a society, we do a piss poor job of teaching society members about this. You can blame that on media. You can blame it on whatever you want. But how many parents out there know anything about fentanyl? None. You got to give it to a 7th or 8th. Like, hey, because I coach football, right? And I tell my players this stuff. There's always like a lesson during the week. It's coach time. The boardman has nothing to do with football. But I want them to have something to go with, so they can make those decisions later. It's
so valuable. Like I said, I've had these frank conversations with my kids for years when they were probably too little, and most people would be like, "You're crazy," but and it was just like, "Hey, here's what I saw today. Like this is the real outcome of if you go down that road." And just like having those conversations is important, even if you don't know about it, and you've never been in that world. Like maybe this podcast will educate you, and to have that conversation with your kids, and it's a little bit raw and it's uncomfortable, but it's important. And, I've probably shared too much, but hey, like, I tell my kids the stories like about the guy with the hole in his arm that he's shooting up into his vein because he's rotting, or the dude, he pulled his socks off in booking and maggots fall out of his freaking socks. It's like my kids remember those stories and they're like, oh shit, I am not going to do that. And maybe you got to scare them a little bit too.
I did it with mine. We came out of Hoop Fest, and they did their best in Spokane to clear out downtown. They really tried. They do like a week or two and try to push it all out. The problem is all of us have to park right outside of downtown, so you walk right through it anyways. But there was a guy out there that was just on the nod bad, and he's like walking off the floor, and it's full tilt Walking Dead, right? And we're weird cops, so we chuckle a little bit. But with my son, I said, I'll tell you this, man. There was never a day in that guy's life before he started using that's what he wanted to be when he grew up. What a miserable existence, to where that all your brain lets you think about is getting that little piece of pleasure the only way you know how.
Yeah.
It's a horrible existence. And that all started with somewhere there was a choice. And maybe he didn't have the knowledge, which I look at and say, that's my fault. As a cop, that's my fault. If that kid never had that knowledge.
Yep.
You know what I mean? That's the world they live in, right, wrong, or indifferent. One of the most innocent questions I ever got was from a 7th grader at Genesis. She said, Sergeant, so you're talking about these labs in Mexico, and so you guys know where they are? Yeah. Why don't you just go stop them? It's like,
drone strike.
It's like,
there's a lot of vets who would volunteer to do that.
And that's what I said. I said, that is such an honest question. And the truth is, there's so much money being made that somewhere at some point in time, somebody way higher than me have decided to put a monetary value on your life.
Boom.
Because we let it. I mean, at some level, I don't care. This isn't intended to be conspiracy theory, whatever. But it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are a lot of people making a lot of money, and not all of them are outside of our country.
Yep.
And now it's entering politics, to where now you're seeing it all around us, to where I always say here in Northern Idaho, coming from Albany, New York, I'm like, don't let this place fall to the politicians have a bad name, but we need politicians in place for a reason. It's like, so what are you going to run on? Have that same straightforward response, make a stance, and then same with the admin role. Now that I'm in an admin role in the sheriff's office, it's the same idea. The amount of political pressure from every different way is quite astounding. I can't tell you how many times a day I talk to people on more of a political sense, and I tell them, like, the one of the few areas that you just can't let up on is the drugs coming to the community. Like, you just can't. You have to hit them where, frankly, where the drug dealers sleep. Even you have to make them uncomfortable. You have to do raids, and a lot of even police forces are saying, it's too dangerous now. And I'm like, you signed up to be a cop. Your guys signed up to be cops. If you respond with, we're not going to enforce that because it's too dangerous. Well, your guys all want to. So do it as safely as possible, but you go for it. Well, it's just kind of like, I like the safety third group because of like, I'm like, anyone who says safety first in our lines of work in military and policing, I'm like, why'd you even join this line of work? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't even know why you did. So, because clearly you signed up to be put in danger somewhat regularly. So do everything you can very responsibly, a lot of planning, but I think we're on the teetering edge societal, and we'll see if it bounces back. Mm-hmm. And I love this podcast and how you guys are talking about and bringing attention to it, because the admin of the worlds, and I'm in that group, are getting a lot of societal pressure to stop. And I will say that.
Yeah, man, I'm nervous. I'm nervous that it won't be enough. I don't know. I touch on one other thing back to that doper on the street, man. It's like, I don't know if people are, there are a lot of people out here, religious people, of course, but like, I'm a full believer that heaven and hell exist right here on earth. And those people that you talked about that are walking on the street on the nod, that dude is in absolute hell, like, all the time. And I feel bad for them.
I have a video of a guy in the back of my car, and I think it's all been adjudicated. It was, far can I go with that? It was a very, very serious crime against another person, and we ended up getting him in custody and almost ended really, really badly. But screenshots of him in the back of my car speaking in tongues, doesn't know his own name, none of that stuff. And I have these couple, and I'll use it in some of the drugs classes where it's this screenshot of his face, and there's no human left in there. There's no person left. It's stripped him of any humanity that's left. And you always want to believe there's a little bit, maybe he was just really high, but man, that existence has got to be a miserable one.
It's miserable. It's hell. He's in literal hell. Like, you don't need to go to the afterworld for that. It's right here. And those people found it.
And I got to say this for those that are out there listening from other departments and agencies that won't let them be proactive. I fight back so much against the safety stuff. Right now, if I go out and make a stop, or you do, or the other cops that really commit themselves to understanding what criminal threat indicators look like, and training and knowing what signs of impairment are, because there's a clear nexus of violent crime and drugs, those guys are a hell of a lot safer than the one that thinks they're stopping a guy for just a turn signal violation. Those are the ones that are at risk, not the ones that actively go out and seek knowledge and network with other people that really know stuff and collectively say, nah, this is the best step forward. Here's the case law. I know I can control your movements, all of that. Man, that is one of the biggest threats to the safety of law enforcement officers, is not training them to current contemporary trends when it comes to dope, because dope ain't going anywhere. It's at the crux of a lot of violence.
Yeah. And I get it. Cause dude, I've had multiple surgeries in my life, and you get the pain pills afterwards, and you're like, well, these are actually that's a pretty good feeling. Right. And then, I'll just take, well, he told me to take all of them. I'll take the rest of them. And then by the end, you're like, wow, that's how it happens right there.
Yes.
Yeah, they keep that going. And they love to dish out the pills, man, for the vets and anybody having surgery, first responders, whatever. Like, they're kicking the pills out like nothing.
Right.
And now you've been on it a year, like, you're hooked. It sucks.
It probably still comes back to culture, right? Like, even in the military, like, military vets are actually, I just started seeing recently a bunch of the people I went overseas with started just getting pushed weed in a lot of these states. Pushed weed. I'm like, guys who have been in firefights, and then you give them weed. I'm like, I can't even imagine. And then you say it's okay. And there's no difference trained wise. There's no difference between flower marijuana and oils and these other things. I'm like, you are triggering psychosis and dependency in ways you can't even imagine, regardless of where your stance is on the legalization of marijuana or not. But treating it like a cure for like veterans and such, it's just insane.
Yeah.
This just popped into my head. There's probably cops out there listening that are like in states that are not able to do their job. You guys hiring? Both departments hiring or what?
So ironically, I'll give a lot of credit to the sheriff on this one, and the undersheriff. The undersheriff, the sheriff, and the leadership team there have done such a great work that we actually aren't. We're one of the few full agencies in the region. Yeah,
wild.
Our detention's hiring, but the patrol is actually full, and we've got a bunch of people lined up to come over.
Oh shit!
So, and we're actually one of the least paid agencies.
You're working on that.
Yeah, we're working on that. I think we do need some correction there, hopefully. But
he's not giving himself enough credit for this. Okay, like they had the forethought and were willing to take a risk on a extremely proactive ISP trooper that was looking for a bit of a career change and picked him up. But what he's done is empowered his guys to go out and be cops and then provide them with training, which is huge.
Yeah,
especially for out there. Because you just have it's just a smaller agency, so your training budget isn't there. But with what you brought, and then you just go on Shoshone County's Facebook page, okay, and see what they do. Go on their social media. And
are you guys have a pretty active social media? Do I need to get on? I need to get on.
I'm terrible at this. The sheriff gets on me about this all the time because I need to do better.
We know some people that are in that. We can help you with that.
That'd be fantastic because that's not one of my talents.
No,
sharing what we do, but
what they do when they do, just check it out.
And we can't even put a lot of it on there.
Right. Yeah.
We've gotten keys and keys and keys of dope that we can't put on there.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Like what is going on? Is it because you guys are right on the 90? So
it's a combination of issues. So kind of what he mentioned with Bonner County, certain areas of the U.S. just get drawn to areas where you can get lost. Right. So there's a section that I'm not going to name because I'll give it away. But in the region between ours and our worlds that we already know a bunch of people go and disappear in the hills there that have felony warrants. Right. And so there's a bunch of gulches and time, and they weren't well staffed for a long time in that region, combining with it's on 90. So you almost need double the staffing that's recommended to do what you need to do. But we've found an immense amount of guns coming out of that region, an immense amount of dope. And even though this is all fantastic stuff, I'll still now, being a younger officer, I would always go back to, well, you know what? You just got to enforce it. Comes before that is leadership. It doesn't matter how great a cops you have if the leadership isn't supporting that and mentoring that.
Yeah.
And to where in my current role, I want everything to go back and do the work again because I love doing the work. I don't get to do the work much anymore.
Yeah.
To where in that region, like you said, give myself more credit. It's the entire leadership team believe in this credo, for lack of better terms, that you have the people. You got to see what they can do because they can do amazing things.
Yeah.
Usually we just, in these types of fields, high liability fields, we hold them back. We hold them back because we're scared of what could happen and what they're capable of. I mean, I'll give credits to the guys, what those guys were capable of before I ever showed up and before the sheriff showed up in that role and before the undersheriff showed up. It was already there.
Right.
And then you just got to cultivate it.
That's fantastic.
Well, just empower them, man.
Yeah.
And show them what's up and then reward it. Have a culture that rewards it. We're like, okay, you see the difference. And then they start to see the crime rate drop. Man, this is still a small enough community where if I take this guy off the board, all of a sudden prices double and we're not getting the crime rate on the back end. And Coeur d'Alene's, we start being really aggressive with stuff and all of a sudden our crime rates go down. And guys are frustrated. They can't go find anything. They can't go find any dope in the city.
Fun story. I used to, before I knew him, it was when I first showed up and started working dope. And I'm from New York. I don't even know this area. In fact, I was on FTO and my FTO was like, all right, go out 95 and take a turn. And I literally look at my FTO and was like, where's 95?
One
True
for
story.
orientation,
Yeah.
7 for proactive.
That's exactly what it was. I got a 1 for orientation. More, I'm sure, still remembers that story. But so I'd go down there, bang off a 15th. It was a bad community. And then I watched it before I knew what you guys were doing. I'm like, what? It's all drying up. It's not because of just me, because I wasn't there a lot. It was just drying up. And you watched in a matter of, well, you probably have a better timeline, 12 months.
Yeah.
12 months. There's always some on the edges, but it was virtually non-existent compared to what I saw when I showed up.
That's wild.
I see messages now where they won't even stop. They won't stop at the gas stations because it's cheaper gas in Idaho than Washington. Yeah. And they'll still say, dude, don't do it right here. Don't stop at that last one before the mountains because it's us and ISP. We're always watching those gas stations.
Right. And it's pretty obvious. I got a buddy that used to work for Homeland Security. I'll tell you his name after. And he told me I think it was the Maverick over in Post Falls. and he was there getting gas. He's retired, but he's like, dude, this van pulls up, like 2 BMAs come out, and they're like, track suits, like they are not from North Idaho.
Yeah.
Rental van, and like he's like, yeah, I got on the phone real quick with whoever he knows somewhere and freaking timed him out. And I was like, yeah, pretty obvious. Like you show up, like
sucks, man. 23rd and Sherman dried out.
It's a proven technique. It's not rocket science. We know it works.
It's not. You're not like racially profiling either. No, I hate when that comes up.
Yes.
You're criminally profiling,
100%.
And it doesn't matter what color skin they are. Like it's pretty damn obvious to anybody that's been working the road for a while. Like, okay, that dude's up to no good. Like,
yes,
and I'm gonna jam up.
And it's all about behavior. You cannot dork out on this stuff. Like you're watching human behavior, and usually it's your response to a consequential stimulus. But you establish a really good baseline of what the average law-abiding public looks like, either on the road or in the city, right? You just naturally do. All you have to do is pay attention. And you may not even be able to articulate it if you're like younger cop or you're not around dudes that can help you articulate it. But then you'll just be sitting there, and just for survival, the back for that reptilian hindbrain will be like, ding. You'll see somebody and go, that's weird.
Yeah.
What's he doing right there? And that's an indication. You don't know. Most of the time it's drugs, but you don't know if it's guns. You don't know if he's got somebody in the trunk. You have no idea, or he just beat the crap out of his wife. You don't know, but it's indicators of criminal activity.
And it's so subtle, right? Like, oh, he looked at me too long, or he didn't look at me at all. Yeah. It's like, it's really hard to articulate that to somebody, but it's like, man, and for me, mostly it was hook and deuces, right? Like I didn't get a lot of trafficking stuff for sure, but deuces, like same thing. Like, why didn't you look at me when you drove by? You didn't even glance. You stared straight ahead, like fucking good to go.
Let's sympathetic nervous system response.
100%.
Yeah. And you combine that with good interview courses. Like another thing is like bringing the box to the road. Like I teach interview all the time, and like bring the box to the road. There's no reason. You get a better interview out on the road, and same with you. Well trained, you're safer. You know more. You know what's happening, to the point where I know you've had situations like that. We already had the way in the car, right? Like you saw the meth pipe in the back, and now you're like, the nervous behavior is almost so extreme where you're just like, all right, now I'm just pointing stuff out. I would do it on video and just point stuff out. And the dude didn't realize what I was doing. He's like, I don't know. Okay. I'm like, dude, your neck is pulsating out of your body.
Yeah.
I was like, that's crazy, man. Do you have a medical condition?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had my one guy nearly faint on me, and stuff like that all the time.
I love that. And I was talking to a dude right before shift where I was saying, you ever have them where they like the weird laughter, the awkward laughter when I say something that's not funny?
Yeah.
So, and it happened on one. I look at my partner, I go, you remember that? He just did that. I said, why were you laughing right then? Why did you just laugh? That wasn't funny. But it was this super awkward laugh right in the middle. It's a pacifying behavior to try to make yourself feel better.
I've always said 95% of cops will never be funny on the road unless you're committing a felony.
That's accurate. It's accurate. That's a good tell right there.
Oh,
like, oh, you think I'm hilarious?
These are the conversations that somebody should have with me when I was a young cop, right? Because I didn't know, like, I would take the low hanging fruit, right? Like I find something easy. Like a little scraper bag and a freaking meth pipe. I'm like, oh, sweet, fucking felony hook. Like, and not take it farther. And I'm like, man, how much shit did I miss because I didn't do that?
Yeah. I do it all the time. They'll go out and get a hook and they're all excited. They're like, hey, Boardman, I got this. And that's like, sweet. What'd they say in the interview?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, they wouldn't tell. They wouldn't admit it. I was like, cool. How long have they been using? Like, how much are they using per day? How'd they start? It's like, bro, you had this source of information. Yeah. See it in the back.
I'm so guilty of that right now. I feel like you're talking
right
now.
No, but it's and then they're like, oh, and it's not like I'm talking down to them, but hey, man, I'm telling you, they're going to give you something to go with into the next one, and you might get some understanding as to how they got started. That can help you as a parent. That can help you as a brother. That can help you as a citizen of the community. You can go out and learn that stuff, which is why I'm super passionate about talking about it. Right, so that other people out there can kind of we have all this knowledge rattling around. I want other people to have it.
But I mean, these are good life lessons, right? That's important. Like, man, just take it a little farther, see where it goes. Like, what's the next step?
And treat them like people. Treat them like people. Another thing, like where you catch cops doing, because we lose our compassion. Usually, cops lose their compassion for their people, and then after that, they actually lose their compassion for each other. So a lot of times, like you'll see that infighting and stuff. It actually comes from losing the compassion there first, and within the work environment, so on and so forth.
Not wrong.
But to where you treat people correctly, and it's amazing what you find. And once in a while, it kicks you in the ass. Doesn't matter who you are. I had one where I was like, I relate it to marriage, where you have to fall in love with the job over and over again, just like marriage, right? Like you don't just give up when you're like, man, this is kind of crappy right now. You go back and do the work. same with it to where like one night I was pulled behind this van. It looked like a doper van. Stopped her. She was suspended, no insurance, all this other stuff. But her daughter was what popped, and she wasn't on dope. So, but her daughter was dressed so well. She was like 4 years old, dressed well, bathed, and I'm like, she was probably like, I don't know. It was a lot of tickets if you wanted to go that direction. And she gives me this sob story, which how many times have we heard in the policing world where they 98% of the time are lying to you? But I was like, you know what? I think there's something different here. So I wrote a written warning, rolled up $40, and I gave it to her.
Dude, good to go.
But this story really isn't about me, because I was like, so she said she needed to like buy milk and bread or something to get her through or something like that. That's why she needed the money. She showed up to my office and left me a card, a box of cookies, and $40 and said, thank you, because it helped me get to she had something about getting to a job and get through to that point.
Fucking rad.
And like, who's better in that situation? This is a story I tell new people. I'm like, it wasn't me. It was her. I mean, she gave me so much life,
dude,
to keep doing what I'm doing.
That is huge.
And did way more, because it costed me way less to give her $40 than it did for her to give me $40.
Right. Yeah.
And technically interest for the card and cookies.
Yeah, there you go. With it. Wow. No, that's
a huge story, man. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah, but those do carry you, man. It's just like when you run into the ones that are like, I thought it was the worst night of my life when you arrest me. That was the best night of my life. And thanks for treating me with respect. And then they'll hit you back later. You know, whatever that interaction was, thank you for treating me like a human being. It's been a long time since I've been stopped and somebody treated me decent.
God dang.
Yeah, don't call them pieces of shit. You see that all the time when people lose their compassion, like, oh, it's a piece of shit, you know, this thing. I'm like, don't go down that road. Like, don't do it. And then for the citizens who like watch your show, like who aren't in law enforcement, military, like take the time to do that. And I'm just asking, but to feed back into us, because the amount of trauma and these things we see, it does a world at keeping us going.
Yeah,
dude.
Yeah,
for sure. Like, you know what I mean? Like many times in my career, I'd be in the line at the coffee. You know, I'd pull up to the window, like, oh, they paid for you. And you're like, wow,
that's cool.
It changes my shift, dude. Like, holy crap. Yeah. That was freaking nice. Like, why would they do that? Like, thank you.
And it's not the $5. You know what I mean?
No. It's like, who cares, right? I don't care about buying the coffee, but it's like the
recognition that our community appreciates the 24-hour shift, or the fact that I got called in between graves for court, or the fact that I had to go pull 2 kids out of the lake, you know what I mean? Or whatever that was, whatever those instances were, it's pretty cool. And I know I'll speak for you too, but we're blessed to work in the community we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I'd be a cop in New York or.
No, there's no way. There's no way I wouldn't be able to last.
No.
The amount of community outpouring, particularly, so I just went over to Shoshone, and they've been just incredible to me. They've been incredible to the sheriff, and she runs on that platform. She doesn't get lost in the whole Democrat or Republican thing. And she's like, I'm going to run on it. And a lot of like military law enforcement guys are like tougher dudes and women. And she's just like, I'm just going to run on like kindness to both groups, like to everybody in this community. Legit. And we're going to go from here, and we're going to get as to a place that we're most capable of getting in a positive fashion.
Right.
I was like, that's how it should be. Why do you want to get lost in politics of they're all the constituents, they're all members of the community. So how do we progress as a society? Yeah. Which is cool about this podcast. I researched you guys a little bit on over the last few days. I hit him up I hadn't listened to it yet, but it's very impressive what you guys are doing.
Thanks, dude.
Just a piece of that.
We run the gamut on topics, but you know, I don't know. Maybe we're dialing in more and more. Who knows? I think it's important to get information out there. There's so much power in that, and real information. That's why I like, you know, spending an hour and a half talking to somebody, because you get the actual.
That's why when you said
actual stuff,
finally you unleashed me and said, we're going to talk about dope. I was like, I got you.
Yeah, dude, he was super excited. I was waiting because he's in Hawaii. I'm like, and I had this idea. I'm like, we need to freaking talk about fentanyl. Like, and I'm like, come on, come home.
Like, I know.
Like, let's do this.
And look, there's other dudes that are really good at working dope, but somebody that can articulate. And what he said is so like-minded with me. You have 2 guys sitting here in the state of Idaho that are, I mean, we're pretty well recognized for our dope acumen and like our level of knowledge, but we're both sitting here saying, as aggressive as we are in pursuing people and putting them in jail for it, you can't arrest your way out of this problem, right? The opiate, you really can't. There has to be some follow-on. And in my experience, the court can't be the one to put that on somebody. There has to be some accountability factor, but they have to make that decision, right? Follow-on care is super important. And that's where it comes back to some compassion right there. Look, I realize you're crying right now because I'm taking you to jail and your kids may go to the state. There's a part of that really hits me. They need their mom, but they need her sober. Because we also go to the calls. We had a 3-year-old call his mother on an Alexa device to say that daddy's not waking up and dad's dead in the kitchen with pills on his chest. Imagine what that call could have been if he grabbed one and thought it looked like candy. And this isn't a victimless thing, right? This isn't just one person. And those are the effects that it has on kids in some of these calls you go to. But I think that part's impressive. As aggressive as we are, I haven't lost my compassion for how they got started.
No. And you'll get, and I'm sure you've seen it, you'll even get, and I don't blame this from them for this, some confusion from officers already on the road when they see you talk to somebody like that with that level of compassion. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I believe in it through and through. I'm not going to apologize for it because that kid of theirs is going to remember this. And they're going to remember this one. They might be the only thing they remember if they happen to get clean.
I taught a class recently. I won't say which, but it's a middle school class. There's a teacher that has me come back, which is cool. And she has parents sign like a waiver. Like, hey, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about.
That's pretty good if you're getting waivers.
Yes, prior to.
That's a problem.
And I owe her one. I'm coming, I promise. But young man back there, as I'm talking, he knew way more than everybody else. And then he waits for me after class and talking. He is in and out of trouble. And he kind of tells me a little bit about what his home life is like. And it's just like what you would imagine. And he had already known his brother's friend, who was a teenager, died from a fentanyl overdose. And this is the life that he's in. Like, what are the chances that he is able to beat all the odds and go down this path? It's a better chance we're going to run into him later. Mm-hmm. In that interaction, you have to get what contributed to that. Then we get into a topic about why society the way it is. Why do we have a society that creates this much? For us, our job, we try to interrupt the supply, make it more expensive, right? Like, get out there and hold the people accountable that are delivering it.
But you're also educating, and that's, I think that 2-pronged approach is like, that's absolutely critical, right? Educate so you can hopefully touch the younger generation, and then hammer down on the others. Yeah,
and have rehabilitation programs that are also accountable. Yeah. Like the prosecutor's office worked with the law enforcement stuff over in Shoshone, to where they have this program called iLead, to where you essentially, if you just get caught with lower end dope, you're not a drug dealer, that type of stuff, they will let you go into this program, but you have to pass it to not get charged. Where if you compare the similar programs to like Spokane, anywhere in Washington, Chicago, all these other areas, there's no accountability there. So it's like, all right, we'll let you try a couple of times, and there's no consequences if you fail. Really,
it's just drop charges.
Yeah, it's just drop charges. And so like you have to have both, and I'm rooting for them to pass, frankly, obviously.
Me too. And it's funny when you talk to them, say, when I contact them later and they're clean, right? They're like, oh, what's up, Boardman? They're smiling. It's like, what's it like talking to me without being worried about me searching your car? They're like, dude, it's awesome.
And this isn't insulting them at all. How many do you recognize? They all the time that happens to me, and I don't recognize them because they look so different. This is a compliment to them, because like they don't even look like the same human being.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know? And like, hey, Boardman, I've had that. I'm like, what? That's not you. You look healthy, bro. You got color in your face. Your cheeks aren't all sunken in. It's cool. But that's super rewarding, because they say, go ahead and search. Search me, search the car, man.
That's a good feeling. I have had that before too.
That's cool.
What I had a deputy tell me, I won't say what county, but recently that there's some Narcan resistant fentanyl stuff coming into this area. Is that true?
So that's pretty much all fentanyl, but the stronger it gets, the more resistant it is. Okay. So what happens is fentanyl like kind of lands on your receptors, and so Narcan blows all that fentanyl off the receptors, right? But then it'll settle again back on the receptors. So you might literally Narcan somebody, and they pop up like they're good to rock. They run off and die because that'll settle back down. Or there's other cases where a lot of people on the street are saying it takes 3 or 4 times before someone comes back. And what I am noticing, I'd actually be curious on your opinion on this, because this is hypothetical. It's not knowledge. I'm seeing a lot more liquid version of it to essentially shoot them with. And this is a hypothesis, but I'm wondering if that's why, because it's a more potent hit back.
So they're injecting instead of smoking
to bring them back. Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about like when paramedics arrive and they're hitting them with naloxone intravenous.
But it's even on the street now.
Really?
I'm picking up a ton of. Well, I'm sorry.
Interesting.
I'm in an office now.
Yeah.
Before I was in an office,
Yeah.
I was picking up a ton of it, and I was wondering if that was why. And I don't know the answer to that.
I know it's
one.
more effective if you talk to paramedics. They'll say, because when they get on scene first, a lot of times they'll just go administer.
Can you guys, for those that don't know, explain what Narcan is, how it works, and like what you're talking about, because it's different.
Yeah, go ahead. He touched on that.
Absolutely. So Narcan is just essentially an aerosol spray. If you were using like anything for allergies, it looks very similar. It's just it's usually got a little bit more elongated finger hold.
Yeah.
And you stick it up in the nose and you spray it, and then it'll knock off the receptors,
Okay.
any substance off the receptors to bring them back. Is the idea.
Does it work pretty fast? I've actually never Narcan.
Works really fast.
It's wild. It's wild, and people will be cold to the touch, and you will be certain that
They're damn
Yeah.
near dead. Yeah.
And
okay.
You do it anyway.
Yes, and by the way, they are not grateful when they come back. They are pissed off
That's a good
that
point.
you wrecked their high. So, any new cops out there have never done it. Sometimes you got to be ready for a fight.
Yeah.
But I will say this: when you're talking about fentanyl that's resistant to Narcan, there is a lot of them are using it in combination with xylazine. It's called Trank. So they'll use Trank, which is actually a veterinary tranquilizer, but they'll use it in conjunction with that because it's supposed to give them a heightened high. But that wipes out Narcan. I mean, it makes Narcan effective.
He said something about that, and then there was and I don't want to get in the weeds here with conspiracy theories, but that China's supplying this stuff, and like, is this a coordinated effort to kill off? Is it another way for China to attack the U.S.?
So
is that crazy?
I won't ever give an exact opinion on conspiracy theories. And I will say I almost don't like the title because some conspiracy theories are true, right? Like look at the Wuhan land thing, looks pretty damning in my opinion. But with that, I will say countries have done this for a long time, and we've done it in the U.S. to other countries. You know, if you watch how we infiltrate countries before we look at read the book Horse Soldiers. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, so I like that book. But how we go into countries, we prep to go into for war. And I'm not saying the Chinese are coming after us. I'm just saying that the Americans have used these types of techniques before, not fentanyl, but like, where is it possible? Sure. There's some evidence that Chinese scientists and stuff have been used, but it could just be a money thing too for these Chinese scientists. Okay. So I would never say that is what's happening. I would say they are being used.
I lean in this instance, and you're 100% right, to soften up countries. I don't think that's the first time that would ever been done. I lean towards a money thing, just because fentanyl's been around since the 70s, and Chinese black market has been making it for a really long time. And when we had this opiate epidemic, the Biden administration had said that they achieved this great victory because they got China to finally classify it as a controlled substance, and that was in the last 2 years. Yep. I think it was 2 years they got them to class. It doesn't matter. They don't enforce it. Their labs make so much money, and then they ship it out to a buyer, which is the cartels, because the cartels are looking at it going, I can buy this for X, I can make it for this, put it all together, and then sell it for Y. Mm-hmm. And then they make a ton, hand over fist. Because it's not like opium where it has to be cultivated from plants and there's this limited amount. Fentanyl's made in the lab, right? So quantity, supply and demand, they can get as much as they want, which is why all of a sudden we're getting pill users that are 40 to 50 pill a day users.
Yeah, and I think you get more bang for your buck on that type of conspiracy type stuff off like social media and those things, like and pushing out the trolling engines and stuff. You just get, in my opinion, you'd get more for your buck there.
And they probably don't care. I mean, what, is like 100-something thousand people in the U.S. a year die from fentanyl?
Yeah, it's not going to actually affect.
They probably don't give a crap, right? Like, I mean, the cartels, like they're killing off a section of their clientele, but then it's such a small amount.
It makes them more popular.
They don't care, right? Yeah,
that's that nuance of the industry. And the last I had, I think it was 2022. It was like 127,000 were killed. Wow. 67,000 were killed by traffic fatalities, to give you an idea. It is the number one killer of males between the ages of 20 to 35, like that little mid-range. Wow. It's the number one killer. Just to give people an idea, because I want them to have this knowledge of why it is so lethal. The issue is you are trusting some little cartel minion to dose you accurately. DEA said that 2 milligrams of fentanyl is lethal to the average adult. When we were testing pills and they were actually testing the quantity of fentanyl inside of the blue Mexi 30 pills, it was between 2 and 6 milligrams. Ooh. So you're already starting at what is considered a lethal dose. To give you some background, my wife's ER nurse. If they're going to administer fentanyl intravenously, they give them 100 macrograms. So do the math. You're at about a 20th, right? Of what is the small dosage amount. Now, good news is most people smoke it, so you're not getting all that at once. But imagine, and I tell this to kids, it's like, man, your buddy can tell you, bro, I took this last weekend. It was sick. I had such a good time. I went to a rave, with some glow sticks. That's how I got down when I was in high school,
I never did the glow stick.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, me neither. But other stuff in Albany.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it was a blast. Had a really good time. And he's probably telling you the truth. He can't be sure. He or she can't be sure. They can't be sure.
No, it's Idaho.
Yeah.
You can say
can't
she.
be sure.
Yes. They have no idea that the one they're giving you is either double or triple that amount.
That's a scary thing. Yeah.
That's why it's so freaking lethal. That's why if you look at overdose numbers, which I'll add to this podcast, give our boy a picture of that.
Yeah, cool.
2014, 28 skyrocketed. Yeah. I mean, my gosh, how with that dosage quantity and that much of that lethal substance inside of those pills, how can you control it?
And with that skyrocketing, back before I was with Shoshone County, I had a guy over there that we talked a ton, and we were talking guns, and I watched guns go up and this is a personal stat when I was out there working. They went up roughly 400% for me that I saw on the road too in the same time frame. And I coordinate with that, the upping in drugs moving, but also I also put it back on like these kids and stuff. When you tell them like, you grew up in a bad community and like you've got no other way out, you still have to have some sense of responsibility, so where I grew up in a really bad neighborhood, you would probably know where Orange Street is. It doesn't, if someone just said it wasn't my fault and it was tough and I fell into that and that's it's not your fault. You don't have a way out. Then you have an easy excuse for life.
Yeah.
And so it's a combination of preaching that to our younger people who are now the adults of the generation. Combined with the huge increase in drugs that I think caused that.
That's funny. That's the second part of that conversation with that young man that waited for me after class. Hey, man, you got every excuse to have a lesser life. Got everyone. It's not about fairness, right? You can't control certain factors. You focus on the things that you can control, right? Don't let that be an excuse to live something lesser. You're still going to have opportunity. But it is a more dangerous climate for kids growing up now, that's for sure. Even here in Idaho, where, man, obviously we really push to try to make it safer. It's still around. Like, we can't get rid of that.
Are you guys seeing cartel activity up here in North Idaho? That surprises me so much because I don't completely oblivious, anymore. But looking around, like I don't see a huge amount of indicators in my bubble, but they're here.
So it's kind of like these other things, right? So if you go down to when I was down to Southie Tucson, and they actually certified us as police officers down there, we were actually working as certified cops. I drove by
because I slip up all the time.
How embarrassing! My computer died. I've never had that happen before. Out of like 150 episodes of various podcasts, yeah, not bad.
Performance anxiety.
It is. It's like I get stressed about this. I had one a couple podcasts ago where like the Wi-Fi went out in the building and the shit just stopped. And I happened to look exactly when it happened. And I was like, holy crap. So I got it booted back up and like it was like a 10-second chunk that got missed. And I was like, oh,
you are human, bro. It's
stressful, bro. Like, I mean, but these conversations are important and it's like, I don't want to miss something, right?
Yeah.
Like, we all want to be performers in whatever we're doing. And that's just the nature of it. So I try to do
it was like an hour and 20 minutes of being professional. All we did during the break, we were totally inappropriate.
Yeah.
So much crap.
Yeah.
Got it out of our system.
Didn't miss much.
Yeah, we're good to run.
Went and ran a lap around the building. Now we're back.
I don't even remember what we were talking about.
We took a couple shots. I think you were asking me about the gang work and cartel.
Oh, yeah. Cartel stuff. Yeah.
So I went into how down south it's very different. It's very apparent. Up here, because of what we've done and what Idaho's approach to this stuff is, it's all cloak and dagger. For example, you'll see motorcycle groups going around Spokane fully patched up.
Yeah.
You don't see that over here. I know
I don't.
many of them that are moving, and I track many of them.
Yeah.
And my agency tracks them. However, a lot of them go around unpatched. They don't want to be seen, that type of thing. They will still Coeur d'Alene. They'll do the runs down there.
There's a particular bar downtown that I'm like,
yeah.
But they're not dirty when they're doing it.
Exactly. They're patched up.
Super smart.
Is it? So you've got the OMGs. Are we seeing like Black and Hispanic gangs up here too? Because they would stick. Honestly, like North Idaho is not racist. Don't go there. But it is like 98% white, and they'll stick out.
So, and that's where I like tattoos.
Yeah.
So to where like if you spot some gang tats coming through on the highway or something, a lot of them would be moving, and they still didn't do much here. But a lot of those groups that I've seen predominantly when I was doing the interdiction portion was actually pushing property. So they do like raids on malls and stuff in Cali or Spokane or wherever they want to do, and they push all the way across east as far as their chains work. So we'd find, 10, 15 laptops plus tons of credit cards. Anyway, on and on and on. But the cartel and I've gotten quite a few MS-13 guys even. I've never seen them stop. It's always in transit. I've never seen them, and I'm not saying they don't. There might be one that's cost conscientious that stops at a gas station.
Gotta hit that Costco gas.
Yeah, he's like, that Costco pizza. I just discovered Costco pizza for the first time.
And
it's a slippery slope in the carb world that'll wreck you, bro. Don't do it.
Yeah. So, and so they don't stop through, or they stay unmarked commonly. And and again, comes back to training our guys ahead of time. Most guys out there don't even recognize it. In fact, our jails, I had to come up with a system when I was with ISP, but also then with this new county of there's gang members in our jails all the time. And there's gang members coming in because they're traveling through, and they're actually very commonly not getting documented. That's a huge problem. All the time coming out from New York or working down south or just my general gang knowledge, I'll spot gang members on the street. I would be willing to bet, less than 5% where actually I'd say, hey, can you let me know if he has any gang ties? Less than 5% are even in there. And they should be.
Right.
Yeah.
They've had a ton of contacts with cops up till now.
Right. That's important info because I was always impressed where I worked, the SO and the PD guys, like they could just call into their dispatch and get that.
Yeah.
Our shit didn't work like that, dude. As the chippy down there, it was like there was no database. Like so you'd always hit up them like, yo, can you run this guy out? Like, and they run them locally, and it's like, oh, we've got multiple contacts, and they get so much more information like that. That's super important.
It's just apathy, bro. Like in our community, number one, you don't want to realize that it's there. You don't want to see it as being there. And it hasn't been a problem historically. So I think from a agency perspective, it's like, we're not going to put an emphasis that. That's not a current problem.
Yeah.
Then let's not be corrective. Let's be preventative because it's going to be a problem. So why don't we get in front of it now?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a tough sell.
Yeah.
That's a tough sell.
And that's what happened to Spokane. The Spokane guys will tell you that. You said you had friends over there. My brother works over major crimes over there.
Yeah.
And so actually he makes fun of me for this story still to this day, coming out of Albany, right? I lived in like a ghetto neighborhood in Albany, decided on landing here. So I was like, I'm going to move to Spokane. That's the smallest I'll go.
Yeah.
And I come out to Spokane looking for a house, and I literally found a $60,000 3-story house. I'm like, this is legit. This would cost $450,000 out in Albany. So what I didn't know, so I brought it to my brother. I'm like, how is this cheap? This is insane. I'm buying it tomorrow. And he's like, dude, that's in Felony Flats. And I was like, what? He's like, it was no, it was next to the jail, just west of there. And back then it was the rougher community. So Hilliard's on the east side. And to me, that was the nicest neighborhood I'd seen. So I'm like, come from New York to here. I'm like, wow, this place is incredible. Yeah. And so now, though, take it 10 years later, because it wasn't like that in Spokane back then. But they watched these young groups of kids, and all it takes is a real OMG from somewhere else to come in and take a group of kids that everyone's downplaying, particularly cops are the worst at this. No, it just causing trouble. They're running a group. What do those guys come in? Within a year, they know how to run a gang.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts. So, and within 10 years, 10 or 12 years ago, I came out here, it is a completely different scene. And now there's gangs that were laughed at, not even 10 years ago, that are committing most of the shootings in Spokane.
There are a lot in Spokane, and that 100% infiltrates over here with our youth here that are clicked up with those groups over there.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they have a foothold or a house over here, but it absolutely has affected our community here.
Sucks. And then we underplay it because they'll be down playing ball in your guys' neck of the woods. And at that age, they're proud of what they do. They're not as street smart. And they'll literally tell you, oh, yeah, I'm a Rico Suave or whatever.
Right.
And then the guys are like, oh, okay, buddy.
Yeah.
Because we know the Bloods, the Crips,
right.
the Latin Kings, and so on. And realistically, they should take attention to that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, because there are certain things that some of them have to do in order to be initiated into that gang that can cause a lot of problems, not only within your community, but for cops. Because a lot of times some of those have a violence against law enforcement stipulation in order to be affiliated.
Really?
Yeah.
Hate to say that, but yeah, it's around.
Yeah. Gang initiation is a very strange thing, and I won't get too far off into that. But they can literally be anything. They'll just make up a new rule, and it'll be like, well, do a hit and run right now, and they'll take another car out and then go off. Like, it's really kind of on the fly even sometimes. A lot of times, like he said, it's violence, something like that.
I hate hearing that in my community here, but
well, it's not as much. It's just think about where we are geographically, right?
Yeah.
You can't be there. And I grew up in Spokane, so I can talk some shit, okay? Because I know what it was, right? And I know what it is now. And I went to school at Lewis and Clark, like downtown Spokane. And I have family that was law enforcement in Spokane. That area has changed so much.
Yeah.
There's so much. It's just a proximity thing. We're always going to have spillover.
Right.
You can't be in this part of Idaho next to a state like Washington and not have inevitable spillover.
Yeah. Overall, we have an amazing area to not have a huge game problem at the moment. More of what I think we're referencing is like, let's get ahead of it. Let's prevent it, because it is actively trying.
Yeah.
That's what's cool, though, I know you guys run this in your agency too. Nobody knows their neighborhood or their community better than the people that live in it. I tell people that all the time. Look, you've naturally established your own baseline. I know you're not a trained cop for observing criminal behaviors. You know what's normal and what's not. You see something weird in your neighborhood, let us know what's up.
Yeah.
There's no crime check here. You know what I mean? So hit us up if there's something weird in your neighborhood. We'll come out and check it out and trust what you're seeing is abnormal or irregular for your community.
Yeah, that's important. You guys have hope for the world in North Idaho in general?
I absolutely do.
Yeah.
I think people go down, then take the historical approach. I love history. Take the historical approach of where we were even 100 years ago. This is one of the best eras ever. This is the best era ever to live. Yeah. So even when you talk about these things, it's to learn from other mistakes or progress. As much as I hate the word progress, sometimes it's the opposite. But this is the highest morals that I've seen in the world historically as an average that we've ever had. So I think it's absolutely amazing, and particularly in Idaho, which is what brought me here. And listening to your podcast, what brought you guys here. Yeah. The community is incredible. So if the community stays strong and the society stays strong, and like you said, call and tell us if you think a drug dealer's on the corner, you know?
Yeah.
You don't see that in New York. You don't see that in Chicago anymore. And if you lose the community working with you, then we're just going to be a force that represents the community. So we're just going to respond to things. So long story short, absolutely. I think it's amazing. This is a great place to live. It's a great place to raise your kids.
I've called it the like sanctuary of sanity. I know. It's like
a good way to put it.
Yeah, and we've talked about it on the spot, but it's like a 20-year throwback, right? Neighbors are still out there. They're still having barbecues in their front yard and all that. And we still believe in personal freedoms. Sometimes we get frustrated as cops because as part of our interdiction methods, there are certain things we would love to be able to do that they're allowed to do in other states. But Idaho still holds really strong to personal freedoms. You'll get that with certain probable cause on traffic stops. Like in California, you can stop for anything, but there's no teeth in the prosecution. Here it's the opposite, right? We want people to go out and live their own lives as they see fit, as long as they're not victimizing other people. If you're not doing that, bro, do you. You go do your thing. Like that's what it's like in Idaho. So you can kind of go out and, whatever it is you're passionate about, go do that, as long as you're not victimizing anybody else.
So I think complacency is what possibly could get us, right? Like where I encourage everyone, if you grew up in one spot, travel.
Yes.
I'm just going to throw a shout out to Southie Tucson. If you get a second, go down there. Don't get shot. And you will appreciate Idaho.
But look at all of us sitting here. I say that to young kids all the time, even when I go teach those classes. And my neighbor, who's a total stud, he's just getting out of the Marines. He wants to come back and do law enforcement. But I told him at 18, it's like, man, go figure out what you're all about. Go live enough places to get enough knowledge to decide where you want to live and raise a family.
Yeah.
And then, do that, you'll want to come back to North Idaho.
And know what's worth fighting for and what's not. And that's important. It took me a long time in life to kind of learn those lessons. Right. And now I'm like, okay, I know what's important. And this community is important to me, and like, it's worth fighting for.
Brothers and sisters out there putting it on the line for a city like Portland or Seattle right now that has no appreciation for what community you're fighting, what culture are you fighting for? Right. What way of life?
And there I'd say promote, run for office.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the only, you can only control your level of influence. I mean,
Yeah.
shoot, that's what got me to promote, you know, in the military too. 'Cause
Right.
I had no interest in promoting, like promote
Same.
up, run for office, do something in your community to where you can control a larger faction.
Mhm.
Don't just sit there and be a beat cop for your whole career if you feel called that you would like to change it.
Or if you're that cop out there that is a hard charger and you cannot do what you want to do in your current community,
Come here.
Hit us up.
come
bro.
here. You will get hired.
Hit us
You
up.
can do the job that you signed up for, and that's freaking beautiful.
Some of us got too many skeletons in the closet.
You're already hired. You're good.
Mhm.
Well, shoot. We're well into it now. Let's call it.
Yeah.
That was good. Thank you guys.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Seth, great to meet you.
You too. Appreciate you
Eric,
having me on.
always a pleasure. You know,
Always.
great knowledge, dude. That was phenomenal knowledge. Thank you guys. That was good stuff. So, yeah, at that, we'll catch you on the next one.